Morning light spills across Market Street, brushing the red bricks of downtown Riverside with a soft October glow. The air is crisp, edged with the first whispers of winter. 72-year-old Benjamin Lewis moves through the quiet like a man who has spent a lifetime mastering stillness. Every morning since his retirement 5 years ago, he has followed the same ritual. Up at 6, black coffee, and a measured walk through the waking city before the noise of traffic begins. To most, he's just another elderly man taking his time. Few know that the calm, dignified figure once presided over the Ohio Supreme Court as its Chief Justice, the man whose rulings shaped the state's legal foundation for more than 2 decades. He prefers the anonymity Riverside offers. Here, he's not Your Honor, not the architect of legal precedent, just Ben, the quiet man with the steady gait who waits for his coffee at Corner Grind, a small shop tucked between a bookstore and a dry cleaner. At 8:43 a.m., he arrives as usual 10 minutes before opening. The streets are nearly empty. He clasps his hands behind his back, breathing in the cold morning air, listening to the hum of a city just beginning to wake. The shop is still dark inside. Benjamin doesn't mind. He has long learned the value of waiting, years of courtroom patience distilled into quiet acceptance. He checks the time on his phone, then leans gently against the wall beside the door. The maple leaves crunch underfoot. A bus sighs to a stop at the end of the block. Across the street, a woman walks her dog, glancing briefly at the elderly man standing by the coffee shop. Nothing unusual. Nothing suspicious. Then a police cruiser turns onto Market Street. It rolls past slowly, its reflection gliding across the cafe windows. Benjamin notices without concern. Police patrol this stretch regularly. He has spent a lifetime respecting their work, defending their right to enforce the law fairly. But the cruiser slows, circles the block, and returns. This time it stops directly in front of him. 2 officers step out. One is tall and broad-shouldered, early 30s. Officer Derek Harrison, an 8-year veteran of the Riverside Police Department. His partner, Officer Tommy Brown, looks younger, uncertain. Their eyes scan the quiet street before settling on Benjamin. Harrison's tone is firm, rehearsed, carrying that edge of authority too often used to mask insecurity. "Morning, sir. Can I ask what you're doing here?" Benjamin straightens, offering a polite nod. "Just waiting for the coffee shop to open." "I come here most mornings." Harrison studies him, skeptical. "Shop doesn't open until 9. "You don't have anywhere else to wait?" Benjamin answers evenly. 15 minutes isn't long. The tension hums almost imperceptibly, a vibration of ego meeting calm restraint. Harrison shifts his stance, glancing at his partner, then back. "Can I see some ID?" Benjamin moves slowly, careful not to alarm. He retrieves his wallet, hands over his driver's license. Harrison glances at it. Benjamin Lewis, 72, a local address. Everything checks out, but something in Harrison's gut insists otherwise. Across the street, the woman with the dog has stopped. Her phone is raised, recording. "Mr. Lewis," Harrison says, "we've had reports of suspicious activity in the area. Loitering, panhandling. I'm going to need you to move along." Benjamin's voice remains calm, deliberate. "Officer, I'm simply waiting for a business to open." "That's not a crime." Harrison's jaw tightens. "Sir, I'm asking you to comply." "Am I under arrest?" "You're being detained for questioning." The words hang heavy in the cool morning air. Benjamin exhales softly. "On what grounds?" "Failure to comply with a lawful order." "Turn around." For a long moment he stands still, 72 years of integrity pressing against the weight of arbitrary power. Then slowly he turns. The handcuffs click sharp against brick, echoing down the empty street. Across the road, the woman's camera captures the moment the law humiliates one of its own. And with that sound, metal against dignity, the quiet morning in Riverside changes forever. By the time Benjamin Lewis reached the Riverside Police Department, the video was already spreading like wildfire. The title was simple, damning: "Elderly black man arrested outside coffee shop." Within 30 minutes it appeared on neighborhood Facebook groups, then Reddit, then Twitter. The clip, shaky but unmistakable, showed a well-dressed elderly man standing calmly while a white officer cuffed his wrists against the wall of Corner Grind Coffee. There was no shouting, no resistance, no crime. Only the quiet violence of humiliation. By late morning it had been viewed thousands of times. Outrage poured into the comments. disbelief, anger, weary recognition. Again? Someone wrote. How many times do we have to watch this story? Others tagged journalists and civil rights attorneys. The name Benjamin Lewis hadn't yet sparked recognition, but the image of a 72-year-old man in handcuffs spoke for itself. Inside the precinct, the arrest was treated like routine paperwork. Harrison filled out forms reciting protocol unmoved. Brown processed fingerprints and inventory, eyes down, his discomfort growing by the minute. The desk sergeant, Patricia Wilson, 20 years on the force, paused when she saw the suspect. Something about the man's posture unsettled her. He wasn't angry. He wasn't defiant. He simply stood with quiet composure, as if the indignity was something to be recorded, not resisted. Meanwhile, the outside world was turning. At the Riverside Tribune, reporter Sarah Johnson was scrolling through social media when she saw the video. She'd covered misconduct cases before and excessive force, racial profiling, corruption. But something about this clip struck deeper. The setting was ordinary, the act subtle, yet the imbalance of power was undeniable. She made a few quick calls, confirming that the arrest had indeed taken place that morning. Then she began digging. Sarah's instinct told her this wasn't an isolated mistake. She requested public records and personnel files, combing through old cases. What she found made her pulse quicken. 12 formal complaints against Officer Derek Harrison over 8 years. Excessive force, racial bias, unlawful detainment. All dismissed after internal review. Patterns emerged. Names repeated. Minorities arrested, charges dropped, reports inconsistent. Harrison's file read like the shadow history of Riverside policing, a story written between the lines of bureaucracy. Back at the department, Harrison and Brown returned to patrol, unaware that their morning had already gone viral. As they drove, Harrison's radio crackled, dispatch calling him back to headquarters. The tone was clipped, urgent. When they arrived, Chief Martin Anderson was waiting. His office blinds were drawn, the air tense. On his computer screen glowed the official portrait of a man in judicial robes. The headline above it read, "The Honorable Benjamin Lewis, Chief Justice, Supreme Court of Ohio, 1993 to 2019. Anderson didn't speak at first. He just turned the screen toward them. Do either of you recognize that name? Harrison stared blankly. No, sir. That's the man you arrested this morning. The words landed like stones. For a moment, no one moved. Brown's face went pale. Harrison blinked as if trying to process what he was hearing. Anderson continued, voice low but hard. You handcuffed the former Chief Justice of the Ohio Supreme Court, the man who wrote landmark rulings on civil rights and constitutional law. The governor's office is already calling. The mayor wants a briefing in 30 minutes. This is going to be bad for all of us. The realization hit like ice water. Harrison tried to steady himself. Chief, it was a lawful detainment. He refused to comply. Anderson leaned forward, eyes blazing. Was he loitering, or was he waiting for his morning coffee? There's a difference, officer, and that difference just became the most expensive mistake in this department's history. Outside, the phones wouldn't stop ringing. Local news stations were demanding statements. City officials were scrambling to contain the damage. But the story had already escaped Riverside's borders, like shared, reposted, analyzed. By noon, it had reached over 50,000 views. By early afternoon, that number tripled. Sarah Johnson's article went live under the headline, Elderly Man Arrested for Loitering Outside Coffee Shop Sparks Outrage. The piece was meticulous and restrained, but its implications were devastating. It questioned police judgment, highlighted racial bias, and quoted experts on constitutional rights. Embedded at the center was the viral video, a frozen frame of Benjamin Lewis's hands cuffed behind his back. The mayor's office lit up with calls from furious residents. Meetings were hastily scheduled, press statements drafted and redrafted, but nothing could contain what had already been set in motion. Back in his cell, Benjamin sat quietly, waiting. He had faced injustice before, in courtrooms, in legislation, in lives affected by the system he once oversaw, but never like this. Experiencing it firsthand changed the texture of his understanding. This wasn't a legal issue. It was a moral one. The machinery of authority grinding on, blind to its own bias. When the dispatch came in confirming Benjamin's true identity, the silence over the radio lasted almost 40 seconds. Harrison didn't speak. Then coldly, he said, "Copy that." Continuing with procedure. By the time he realized the weight of that decision, the world already knew. That night, the city of Riverside stopped pretending its problem was small. The arrest of one elderly man outside a coffee shop had become something larger, a mirror reflecting a system that had long refused to see itself. And somewhere between the noise of outrage and the quiet of consequence, the name Benjamin Lewis began to mean something more than just another trending headline. It became the beginning of reckoning. The Riverside scandal had erupted beyond containment. By the next morning, news anchors across Ohio were reciting Benjamin Lewis's name with astonishment, trying to reconcile the image of the elderly man in cuffs with the man who once presided over the state's highest court. The viral video, paired with his identity, had transformed a local embarrassment into a statewide reckoning. Yet beneath the headlines, the fight for truth was only beginning. Sarah Johnson, the reporter who first broke the story, had barely slept. Her desk at the Riverside Tribune was covered in yellow sticky notes, public record requests, and half-drunk cups of coffee. She was already several steps ahead of the official narrative. Harrison's personnel file had opened a window into something deeper than one officer's mistake. A pattern of tolerance for misconduct, hidden beneath years of paperwork. Every complaint dismissed. Every body cam conveniently malfunctioning. Every arrest report sanitized before it reached review boards. When she called her trusted contact, defense attorney Marcus Williams, he wasn't surprised. "Derek Harrison," he said over the phone. "That man's name has been on half my cases the past decade. He knows how to walk the line, push hard, never enough to trigger a lawsuit. But you feel it, Sarah. You feel the bias every time." Sarah took notes furiously. Marcus provided dates, docket numbers, even whispered names of people too afraid to go on record. The pattern was unmistakable. Systemic protection. Harrison was valuable to the department because his numbers looked good. His supervisors saw productivity, not prejudice. And now one video had exposed everything. At the same time, Benjamin Lewis was enduring a different kind of pressure. The quiet of his Riverside home had been replaced by the constant ring of his phone. Reporters, former colleagues, advocacy groups. His wife Margaret managed the calls with practiced grace, but the strain was visible in both of them. Then came the calls from the police union. The first was polite, almost sympathetic. "Judge Lewis," began Lieutenant William Taylor, representing the union, "we believe there's been a misunderstanding. The officers involved are good men, family men. One mistake shouldn't destroy their careers." Benjamin listened without interruption. The tone was familiar. The soft language of negotiation, the unspoken suggestion of silence. "What exactly are you asking, Lieutenant?" he asked evenly. "Perhaps we could meet privately," Taylor said, "to find a resolution that benefits everyone. No need to escalate." Benjamin's answer was calm but unyielding. Justice isn't negotiated in private meetings. If an apology is owed, it will be made publicly. The line went silent. In the following days, patrol cars began driving slowly past his home, not enough to be illegal, but enough to send a message. His neighbors noticed, whispering about watchful eyes. The intimidation was subtle but unmistakable. Sarah experienced it too. Her car was suddenly ticketed twice in 1 week. Anonymous envelopes arrived at her office containing photos of her leaving her apartment. She received a late-night phone call from a distorted voice telling her to drop the story before it ruins you. When she hung up, her hands trembled, not with fear, but resolve. She knew this playbook. Harassment meant exposure was close. Still, the pressure wore on her. A week into the investigation, she came home to find her apartment door ajar. Inside, papers from the Harrison file were scattered across the floor. Nothing stolen, nothing damaged, only rearranged. A message without words. She reported it to her editor, Robert Taylor, who was furious but pragmatic. "They're trying to scare you off. That means you're over the target," Sarah exhaled shakily. "It's working," she admitted softly. "But I'm not stopping." Meanwhile, Benjamin was beginning to feel the physical cost of moral resistance. During a sit-down interview with Sarah in his living room, his hand began to tremble slightly. He pressed it against his chest, trying to disguise the pain. "Are you all right?" Sarah asked, setting her pen down. "Just tired," he said. "This week has been heavier than most." His doctor later called it stress-induced angina, his blood pressure spiking under emotional strain. She urged him to rest, to step back. But Benjamin's answer was simple. I've spent a lifetime making difficult decisions. I won't be intimidated into silence now. Still, doubt crept in during the quiet hours. That night, as he sat at his desk drafting a formal letter to the police chief demanding accountability and reform, he hesitated. The paper before him seemed to weigh 100 pounds. His wife, Margaret, entered softly, watching him wrestle with exhaustion and principle. Maybe it's not worth it, he said finally. Maybe this is just my pride talking. Margaret placed a hand on his shoulder. Ben, you've spent your life standing for what's right. Don't start sitting now. The cost of justice is always high. That's why so few are willing to pay it. Her words stayed with him. Across town, Sarah faced her own breaking point. The threats, the loneliness of chasing truth in a small city where everyone whispered, began to take its toll. She considered dropping the story just for her safety, for her sanity. But every time she closed her laptop, she saw Benjamin's face, calm and resolute as Harrison locked those cuffs. That image refused to fade. By midweek, both Benjamin and Sarah were at the edge of surrender, exhausted, scared, and questioning whether exposing corruption was worth their peace of mind. Then, like a ripple of light breaking through fog, the letters began to arrive. First came one from Judge Charles Wilson, Benjamin's old colleague from the Court of Appeals. Ben, the legal community is watching. What happened to you cannot stand unanswered. You have our full support. More followed. Judges, law professors, civil rights organizations, former clerks, and even sitting federal justices. Each message carried the same sentiment. Your fight is our fight. By Thursday, Benjamin's dining table was covered in envelopes. The Ohio State Bar Association issued an unprecedented statement condemning the arrest as an assault on judicial independence and public trust. Sarah, too, began receiving messages of solidarity, press freedom groups offering legal counsel, national journalists reaching out to collaborate. What had begun as a local story of humiliation had become a national symbol of accountability. When the weight of silence is shared, it becomes lighter. That night, as rain pattered against the window, Benjamin signed the final draft of his open letter to Chief Anderson, calling for reform, transparency, and truth. Across town, Sarah opened a new document and began typing the headline for her next story. Both knew what awaited them: more resistance, more backlash. But they also understood something deeper. The only thing more dangerous than exposing injustice was allowing it to continue unchallenged. The storm had broken. Now they would see who stood when the waters rose. The revelation came quietly, buried in a stack of subpoenaed records delivered to the Riverside Tribune late on a Wednesday afternoon. Sarah Johnson sifted through pages of dispatch logs and communication transcripts, her eyes scanning the columns of timestamps, radio codes, and officer call signs. It looked like routine paperwork until she found it. One entry, almost invisible in its banality, changed everything. 8:52 a.m. Dispatch to Unit 248, subject identified. Benjamin Lewis, retired Chief Justice, Ohio Supreme Court, no wants or warrants? Or 8:53 a.m. Unit 248, copy that. Continuing with arrest procedure. Sarah's breath caught. She read the lines again. Then again, the implication hit her like a physical blow. Harrison had known. He had known exactly who Benjamin Lewis was, and had continued the arrest anyway. The discovery transformed the story from a case of mistaken identity into something far darker. Deliberate humiliation, intent, malice. Sarah printed the document and laid it across her desk, staring at the evidence that would end a career and shake an entire police department to its core. The next call she made was to her editor. Robert, she said, her voice tight with urgency. I found the proof. Harrison knew who he was. Within hours, the Tribune's newsroom was in controlled chaos. Lawyers were consulted, citations verified, every line double-checked. The headline was explosive but precise. Radio logs reveal officer knew he arrested former Chief Justice. Continued anyway. The story broke before dawn. By mid-morning, national networks had picked it up. Cable news anchors dissected every second of the transcript. Legal analysts called it devastating. Harrison could no longer hide behind procedural excuses. The transcript stripped away every pretense of error. In Riverside, the police department went silent. No public statements, no press releases, only the dull panic of containment. Chief Martin Anderson called an emergency meeting with city officials, but the leaks came faster than his denials. Every major outlet in Ohio had the story within hours. At home, Benjamin Lewis read the report in stunned silence. The betrayal sank deep. He knew, Benjamin whispered to his wife. For 23 minutes he knew who I was, and he left me there. Margaret's hand tightened around his. Then the truth has found its way, she said softly. By evening, the city council called an emergency hearing. Reporters flooded the steps of City Hall. The air outside buzzed with tension, citizens demanding justice, officers avoiding eye contact, camera crews jockeying for space. Inside, every seat was filled. Retired judges, law professors, and civil rights leaders had come to witness history. Chief Anderson sat at the witness table, sweat shining under the chamber lights. Union Representative William Taylor fidgeted beside him, legal papers stacked like sandbags. One chair, conspicuously empty, bore the name Officer Derek Harrison. His lawyer had advised him not to appear. The absence spoke louder than words. When Benjamin Lewis approached the podium, the room fell silent. His voice, steady but heavy with moral gravity, filled the space. For 30 years I upheld the law, believing it to be a shield for the innocent, he began. But what happened to me was not law, it was choice. The radio transcript proves it. Officer Harrison confirmed my identity and continued the arrest. That was no error in judgment. That was a decision. A murmur rippled through the audience, the quiet shock of truth meeting daylight. Benjamin continued, his tone deliberate, judicial, every word weighed like a verdict. This case is not about me. It is about every citizen who trusts that authority will be used with restraint and respect. When power goes unchecked, justice becomes its first victim. When he stepped back from the podium, the audience rose to its feet. Applause swelled, restrained at first, then thunderous. Even some council members clapped. Then came Sarah Johnson. She carried a folder brimming with documentation. Complaint histories, missing body cam reports, overtime records. She laid them on the table one by one, speaking calmly, methodically, like a surgeon exposing a wound. 12 misconduct complaints, she said. All dismissed. Missing body cam footage from multiple arrests. Over $38,000 in questionable overtime tied to extended detainments. The radio transcript confirms deliberate misconduct. This isn't one officer's bad day. It's a system that rewards abuse. Union Representative Taylor's response was brittle, his voice trembling between defensiveness and desperation. Officer Harrison has served with distinction for 8 years. He made a mistake, but Sarah interrupted, her tone unwavering. A mistake ends when the truth is known. Harrison continued the arrest after confirmation. That's not error, that's intent. The room erupted in murmurs. The council members exchanged tense glances. Chief Anderson's face had gone pale, and then the unthinkable happened. Officer Tommy Brown, Harrison's partner, rose from the audience. Still in uniform, he walked to the front, his face drawn but resolute. He asked to speak. The chamber fell silent again. I've been Officer Harrison's partner for 3 years, he began, his voice shaking slightly. I've seen him make bad calls before and push too far, act without cause. I should have spoken up sooner. That morning, after we cuffed Mr. Lewis, Harrison told me to run a background check. When dispatch confirmed who he was, Harrison laughed. He said, "Let him sweat a little longer." Gasps echoed through the chamber. Sarah froze, her pen suspended mid-air. Chief Anderson closed his eyes as though bracing for impact. Brown's next words came quieter, steadier. What he did was wrong. And what I did on staying silent and was wrong too. But not anymore. The confession shattered the last defense left standing. The blue wall that had protected Harrison for years cracked open in front of cameras and witnesses. Councilwoman Janet Morrison turned toward the chief. What immediate action will this department take? Anderson swallowed hard, aware that the city, the state, and the nation were watching. Officer Derek Harrison is suspended without pay pending termination and federal review, he said finally. Effective immediately. Applause exploded through the room. For the first time in weeks, the air felt lighter. Justice wasn't complete, but it had finally taken its first real breath. Outside City Hall, reporters surrounded Benjamin Lewis as he stepped into the cool night air. Flashbulbs burst like fireworks. He paused, looking out at the crowd. The same city that once ignored him as he stood outside a closed coffee shop. Justice, he told one reporter, is not vengeance. It's truth made visible. 6 months later, that truth reshaped Riverside. Harrison pleaded guilty to federal civil rights violations and was sentenced to 18 months in prison, permanently barred from law enforcement. The department entered a federal consent decree, mandatory body cameras, independent complaint reviews, racial bias training. Chief Anderson retired quietly. Tommy Brown received a commendation for courage and joined a community policing program. Sarah Johnson's reporting won state and national journalism awards. And Benjamin Lewis, once humiliated against a brick wall, became a living symbol of accountability. On a bright April morning, he returned to Corner Grind Coffee. The same sidewalk, the same brick wall, the same gentle autumn air now turned to spring. He ordered his usual black coffee. The barista smiled and said, "It's on the house, Judge." Benjamin nodded softly, taking his seat by the window. The world outside moved on, slower, more careful, somehow changed. Sometimes, he thought, justice doesn't arrive in thunder. It comes in echoes, the sound of handcuffs, the voice of truth, the courage to speak. And when it finally comes, it restores not just one man's dignity, but everyone's faith in what the law is meant to be. 6 months after the arrest, the streets of Riverside looked the same, calm, clean, ordinary. But something fundamental had shifted beneath their surface. The story that began with a simple misunderstanding outside a coffee shop had grown into a movement that changed the city forever. Officer Derek Harrison now sat behind federal bars. After weeks of hearings, cross-examinations, and overwhelming evidence, including the damning radio transcript and his partner's testimony, he finally pleaded guilty to federal civil rights violations. The judge's ruling was brief but final: 18 months in federal prison, permanent disqualification from any law enforcement role. For Harrison, once proud of his badge, it was the collapse of a career built on intimidation and unchecked power. Chief Martin Anderson had resigned shortly after, citing personal reasons. Few believed that. His retirement was quiet, shadowed by the department's consent decree with the Department of Justice. Under the decree, every officer in Riverside would wear a functioning body camera. Every complaint would be handled by an independent civilian review board. Racial bias and de-escalation training became mandatory, not optional. The department that once silenced accountability now had accountability written into its DNA. Officer Tommy Brown, the man whose courage shattered the wall of silence, became the unlikely symbol of reform. He was reassigned to the city's new community policing initiative, working directly with neighborhoods to rebuild trust. When reporters asked why he testified, Brown's answer was simple: silence protects the wrong people. Speaking up saves the right ones. His honesty inspired 3 more officers to come forward about misconduct they had previously ignored. And Sarah Johnson, whose reporting refused to die under intimidation, stood on the stage of the Ohio Press Awards that spring. The plaque she received bore the words "Excellence in Investigative Journalism," but she accepted it quietly, saying, "This wasn't about winning a story. It was about protecting the truth." Her articles were syndicated nationwide, her name now synonymous with integrity. She kept every anonymous threat, every late-night voicemail stored in a box labeled "Proof that Truth Costs Something." As for Benjamin Lewis, he had never sought fame or retribution. His civil lawsuit against the city settled for an undisclosed amount, most of which he donated to launch the Riverside Justice Initiative, a program funding police oversight boards and legal education, workshops across Ohio. Money can't restore dignity, he told a local reporter, but it can prevent others from losing theirs. That Tuesday morning, Benjamin woke early, just as he always had. The air carried the faint chill of early spring. He put on his gray sweater and stepped into the quiet, familiar rhythm of his life, the same life that had been disrupted, examined, and ultimately vindicated. When he reached Corner Grind Coffee, the barista behind the counter recognized him instantly. "Good morning, Judge Lewis," she said warmly. "Your usual?" He smiled. "Please. And just call me Ben." As he waited for his coffee, 2 officers passed on patrol. They nodded respectfully, one even tipping his cap. The same uniform that once symbolized humiliation now greeted him with acknowledgement. Small gestures of a city learning from its own reflection. Benjamin took his cup and sat at his usual spot near the window. Outside, the world flowed easily again. Buses sighing at the curb, pedestrians crossing streets, life moving forward. On the front page of the morning paper lay another story. Cleveland enacts new oversight board modeled after Riverside reforms. He smiled faintly, recognizing the ripple effect of what had begun with a single moment of injustice. He sipped his coffee, gazing at the spot on the brick wall where he had once been handcuffed. The memory didn't haunt him now. It humbled him. That sound, metal clicking against skin, had become something larger than shame. It had become a lesson. Some mistakes, he thought, can't be undone, but they can be transformed. Outside, the wind carried the scent of rain and renewal. Inside, Benjamin Lewis, once the humiliated, now the honored, folded his newspaper, finished his coffee, and rose with quiet dignity. Justice, he realized, doesn't always roar in courtrooms. Sometimes it whispers in the steady heartbeat of a city that finally learns to listen.